Always good to have you with us on the Jesus Culture Leadership Podcast 2025. I think like conferences,
Is that what you're
just started
calling?
catching
No.
every conference, it has a
No.
thing. So this is Jesus Culture Leadership Podcast 25.
No, because
And then we're going to have a slogan because you can't actually do anything meaningful without a slogan. So it's going to be alive in 25, something like that. Thrive in
Hey.
25.
hey, I like that.
Yeah.
We're
Welcome to the Jesus Culture Leadership Podcast 25. We're going to thrive in 25.
We're going to thrive in 25.
Did you know you didn't grow up in church, so you don't remember that every year
I feel like
before
that's an
the year
exaggeration.
in the 90s, there was, are you kidding? This is how I grew up. There was slogans about the next year. More in 04, more in 94, alive in 95.
Michael Brodeur, who's on staff with us, an older gentleman,
right.
we said, lose weight in 88, lose your hiney 1990, one more time in 89.
It was all
weight
we had
loss.
to keep. It was all weight loss issues. So we're going to be alive and thrive in
It's 5
in,
years. I was thinking
2025.
It's 5 years post-COVID.
That is a wild thought. to think.
5 years.
5 years. Not for
Post-pandemic.
Texas, it's not.
Well,
Texas never experienced COVID.
Yeah,
so
what are you talking about?
For us in California, it was 5 years. Yes.
I think the world. I mean, that's a 5 years post-pandemic. That's
yes.
a pretty.
We're on the other
we made
side
it.
of it. We're on the
half
other
a
side. Here
decade.
we are.
Half a decade. That's I don't
Better
know.
than ever, stronger and better ever, ready to go change the world for Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, welcome to 2025. We are in the middle of, right now, 21 days of prayer and fasting. We mentioned this last podcast. We talked about prayer, but so many of
Changed your life.
I'm sure you guys took notes, went out in the spirit maybe. So many churches, which I love, take the first part of the year, set it aside, just consecrate it to kind of seeking the Lord and going after God. So many of you guys at your church, wherever it may be, are probably at least in some season of corporate prayer and fasting, which I love. I think when we do prayer and fasting, for most part, people understand the prayer a little bit more. They're like, hey, I know what it is to kind of say, I'm going to set aside times to prayer. I'm going to show up to those prayer meetings. I want to grow in a life of prayer. I think that fasting, and this is a very broad statement, but I think that fasting has maybe not been as much of a discipline that the church has focused on.
And maybe Western.
In Western
church,
for sure. And I would say probably amongst the younger generation, I'm looking at some of them and going, oh, you weren't really raised in a fasting environment where
Yeah.
I was. I mean, when I got to Bethel, even before Bill was there, when I got to Bethel in 1993, Bill came in 95.
Free in 93.
Free. We were free in 93. Bill, I think, came at the end of 95, maybe the beginning of 96. So when I was there as a senior in high school, man, we fasted. I remember doing, as a senior in high school, I did a 40-day Daniel fast. For us, that was no meat, sweets, or soda. So
That's hardcore for a senior in high
yeah,
school.
17 years old. I did no meats, no sweets, no soda for 40 days. And then when Bill came, I mean, Bill brought a fasting culture. I mean, it was Wesley Campbell, Lou Engle, Mahesh Chavda, Bill. These were the people that were coming to us, and they all lived lives that were consistent fasting. And so we kind of lived in that thing. I mean, I look back now, I was so intense as a youth pastor in my 20s. I mean, our youth group just fasted all the time. We would do 40-day fasts before our conferences.
I love it.
We would just get all the youth to do 40-day fasts for our conferences. We would get the entire city to do.
Were kids really fasting food, or were they?
You know, I don't know
Negativity
fully. You know
fast,
how it
secular
is.
music.
Well, we did something for our entire community one time. All of the youth groups got together. We did something called 21 days. No, it was 40 days. It wasn't 20. We didn't even believe in 21 days back then. It was what we called 40-day push. We got about 900 kids in our community to sign up for 40-day, and push is an acronym for pray until something happens. So we did a 40-day push. We handed out like T-shirts and bracelets and gave them pizza boxes with like a 40-day devotional and all that stuff. And then we broke it up into 4 10-day categories. So like 1 10 days, one 10 days was 1 meal a day.
That's awesome.
1
Yeah.
10 days was like a negativity fast where you would fast negativity. 1 10 days was I think a Daniel fast, another 10 days was no sweets or something. We broke the 40 days up. But I was so intense with our youth group, and I'm like, you're doing all 4 of those for 40. I was like, we're not doing this. We're not doing this 10 days.
We're not breaking it up.
You're doing all 4 of those things for 40 days. And then just with Bill, I mean, Bill was a guy who, I mean, I remember him doing a 40-day water fast, and we were doing fasting. And then Lou was with us all the time, and I got discipled by Lou in so many ways. And so I have a real value for fasting. But I'm not quite sure that people always, we were taught fasting as well. So we learned very quickly that, you fast to separate from something. So there's a quote, it's not mine, but with one hand you let go of something so that you can better grab a hold of something with the other hand. Like fasting is the concept that we're going to separate from one thing so that we can better grab a hold of something else.
I heard Lou say, I don't know if it's originated with Lou, but he said when you fast, you let go of the temporal pleasures of earth to grab the eternal pleasures of God.
Yes. And that's what we were raised under, that when you actually, and this was about food though for us.
Yeah.
When I separate from food, that thing that I am in pursuit of every day and I don't even realize it.
Yeah.
That thing that I don't go without, that thing that I desperately need to live, that thing that is both nourishing and pleasure.
Yeah.
That thing that is communal and everything else. When I separate from that, it brings me to the realization that God is my source, that I need God.
Yeah.
That I don't live by bread alone, but I live by every word that proceeds from his mouth.
Yeah.
And we were taught, I remember in youth group, I'm 17 years old, 16, 17 years old, my youth pastor talking about that when you fast, it sensitizes you to God. Like he used the example of, people that break into safes. And in order to crack a safe, they would sandpaper their fingers to make them sensitive so that they could feel where that click was, where that tumbler was. And I remember that example, that when I fast,
such a good picture.
It kind of sensitizes me to God. There's just a sensitivity to God in that. So I really love when we fast. I encourage people. It sucks. I don't like it. It's not like an enjoyable thing. You are separating from pleasure. You're separating from where you're getting your source of energy and everything else. But there's also something that is very catalytic with it.
Yeah.
And I grew up, David Hogan, different guys that I heard, they just fasted every week. I mean, I knew guys that they were literally, I was hearing stories of guys that would literally fast 3 days, eat 2 days, fast. And I'm not suggesting this for people, but I'm saying these are the stories we heard.
Right, yeah.
Fast 3 days, eat 2 days, fast 3 days. Guys that consistently every single week, 1 day a week, they would fast. And I think it's something that we do need to kind of bring back into.
It is kind of one of those, it's the, we talk about spiritual disciplines and how it's just, I think we've lost some of them, and we're just, I don't know. I'm sure there's cultures that are way more disciplined than whatever. But it is one of those disciplines that's like, wow, yeah, Sabbath is one of those disciplines, prayer, those spiritual disciplines, and fasting is like, especially talking about the next generation. It's like, yeah, it's not really how something so essential to the life of Jesus and actually like just so a part of what he told his disciples to do, we kind of brush over. Or even the thought of, I thought fasting once a year, that doesn't mean it's a part of my life.
It's not a regular rhythm.
Right.
It's a rhythm. It's a yearly rhythm.
Yeah. And so I think it's a good conversation
But hopefully
to have.
it reminds us, man, I do want to implement this in. And I want to maybe bring this up because I come from a very, and I say this proudly, a pretty hardcore background around seeking the Lord. Like we're reading books by Frank Bartleman, who prayed in the Azusa Street Revival in 1906. And just, I remember reading stories. There's one of my favorite books called Power Through Prayer, written to kind of preachers. I mean, it's 120 years ago these books were written, by Ian Bounds, who obviously is one of the premier authors in prayer. But he would tell stories about men that prayed. And I'm in my 20s reading these stories. And he tells stories about how these guys would get up in the morning. And he would talk about if your love for God can't break the shackles of sleep, then your love for God is weak.
I love
it was that type
These things
of
are
stuff
dangerous for me
that
to
I would
read.
be reading.
Yes.
He was talking about a story where a guy would get up every morning at 4 a.m. to pray. And when he got up to pray, if he heard a laborer, a bricklayer, working before he was praying.
He'd get up earlier.
No, he would say, "Oh, how this shames me. Doth not my master deserve more than theirs?" Like, this is what I was raised with, right?
Yes.
I was raised reading books and hearing stories about men that got up at 4 a.m. And if they weren't up at 4 a.m. and heard somebody else working, they felt ashamed that they weren't giving God more than what that laborer was giving to, So these are the intensities that I and these missionary stories and all this type of stuff. So I'm going to say all this to say, I am actually very grateful for that, actually. I'm very grateful for that level of kind of intensity. But there's some level that our fasting has kind of become a little bit convenient, or I'm going to say this, a little bit lazy.
Diluted, yeah.
In that fasting biblically really is a food concept. Now, let me say this. There is a biblical precedence for abstaining from things. The Bible actually talks about abstaining from sexual relations with your spouse for a season to whatever else,
Yeah.
or you abstain. Like, there's things where you can kind of abstain. But in regards to fasting, it was a concept that I would separate from food. Now, I'm going to say this on our website, and if you want information on this, jcsacramento.com/fast. Actually lays out some resources for fasting, as well as kind of lays out different types of fast.
Yes.
There's Daniel fast, there's partial fast, there's selective fast, there's full fast. There's also what we would call soul fast. This might be, I'm going to fast social media. I'm going to fast
Secular music. People fast.
secular music.
I have no grade for that.
Yeah,
Not to
I'm going to
shame
fast
anybody.
secular
So
music.
I'm like-
I'm going to whatever else. Now, I'm going to say this real quick. As a pastor, I'm recognizing that there are so many people that
Yeah.
are on so many different, there are different levels of their journey with the Lord and
Yeah.
different levels of maturity in their walk with God.
Sure.
So, for example, there's a new lady that's coming to our church. I'm so happy she's there. She's coming. She's growing her walk with God. It's pretty new. I don't think she has a church background. And so she's decided to fast social media right now. And so I love that. I full on celebrate that and am
Yeah.
stoked that you're separating from something to better get a hold of God. And she would say, "Hey, man, every time I want to get on social media, I just stop and go, okay, I'm going to take some time to pray." So listen, I'm not downplaying that. I do want to really encourage you, though. I think that we really need to lean in a little bit. What does it look like to actually separate from food?
Yeah.
Whether that's a meal a day,
Yeah.
whether that's a day a week. I mean, and there's everything. Even people that we just so depend and rely on caffeine, on food, on protein or whatever else. And there is something about the thing that says, I'm going to separate from this source
Yeah.
to make this declaration. God, you are my source.
Yeah. So true.
You're what fuel me.
Yeah.
And you've probably seen it with we're with younger generation. If you could talk to the younger generation people right now, who we love you with all of our heart, but I want to give you books that are radical. I want you to hear the stories of the people in the 1800s. This is what I want.
I think it is that concept of just like that fire falls on sacrifice, and that there is a cost to these things, to breakthroughs, to experiencing the fullness of God. Like that comes with, it's all David saying, I'm not going to give God something that costs me nothing. And at the end of the day, and I love you're so delicate. You spoke about this yesterday in our staff meeting, like kind of trying to gently prod the staff to make sure it costs them something. Derek and I went home and we're like, he could have gone 10 times harder on that. Like, yes, fast food. Like the social media fast, I was thinking, I'm fasting social media. I'm like, social media for most people, and I can speak for the younger generation because I've worked with them for 8 years. I have got my own kids. For social media, it is nothing but comparison, coveting, jealousy.
And
I'm
so
like,
what we're saying is social media, keep going, social media is unhealthy.
so I'm like, yes.
It's toxic for a lot of people.
Yes.
So it's not food.
Right. So I'm like, social media, I don't even think for the next generation, it's so toxic. It's so unhealthy. That's not something you should fast from. You probably just shouldn't be on it. So it's like,
Or be extremely limited and
Yes.
sober in what you're doing. with it.
100%.
Yes.
Bible says do not covet. So I'm like, social media, I'm on this whole thing where I'm like, I think social media, I think it's David looking at Bathsheba. I think it's you're on the rooftop looking at what's not yours, and you are getting sick with desire and toxic sin of what's not. I think I'm on this thing right now, social media. I'm like, oh my gosh, I think.
So when
when you're fasting,
so when
that
you so
I'm
when
like,
you go, hey, I'm going to fast this, or I'm going to fast Netflix, or at some level you're like, I get the concept, and I legitimately want to applaud anybody who says I'm going to separate from something to better pursue God. I'm like, I'm in, let's do it.
yes,
But I do think there's something that says, hey, I'm going to separate from constant entertainment.
yeah,
I'm like, yes, I think you should. And I
Right.
like that. But it is a little bit different than, because when you fast food, food is not unhealthy and toxic.
no, yes, again,
Food is the source of how I live.
yes,
And that's different than coming to social media. Social media is not the source of how I live.
right,
And so this concept of we fasted for a season to reset our hearts, to recognize again that our flesh does not run our life,
yeah,
that God is the source of my life, that truly when he says I don't live on bread alone, but I live, and like, I do live on bread, God. Like
Right.
you created, I can't live without bread.
yes.
But there's a deeper revelation.
There's a different bread, though. Jesus says, I'm
Yes.
the bread of life.
Yes.
And I think when Jesus tells the disciples, they couldn't get the breakthrough, and he goes, well, this doesn't come out with prayer and fasting. I don't think he was talking about Instagram fasting.
Yeah.
I think he was talking about
Yeah.
food fasting. And so I think there does need to be something as leaders where we reclaim and we make sure that we're staying faithful to the text, that it's commendable. And I think the Lord is pleased. And I think that's really good. I'd say, I don't think, I'm not sure that fasting food has been a part of my rhythm as much as it's going to be, but social media fasting, absolutely. I'm like, that's just something I pull away from regularly because I should.
Because it's toxic
Yes.
and unhealthy.
Yes. So I think it's good. And I haven't heard many people talking about that. I follow a lot of church leaders and a lot of churches and ministries, and it is like social fast is like the thing.
And I think at some level, yes, I do think we probably need a harder core message. I do think we probably need a harder core message. I do also think that people's heart is to throw a wide net. I don't want to, like sometimes as a pastor, I'm like, I don't want to throw such a narrow net that only the most
Yeah.
serious, intense believers can actually participate in this.
Yeah.
I am kind of wanting to invite people in. But I
Yeah.
think whenever we don't actually make the distinction,
Yeah.
that, hey, guys, I love it, man. If food's too much for you right now, and we do, again, maybe we talk too full of, can you ever be too full of grace? But, man, I was just in a
Too soft.
I was in a hardcore, man. You just read books like Leonard Ravenhill. Leonard Ravenhill, I remember reading a book by Leonard Ravenhill on prayer, and he was literally talking about a prayer meeting. And he's like, if you're reading your Bible, you're not praying. It's not prayer. Like they were so hardcore about like, no. You sit there reading your Bible during a prayer meeting. That's not prayer.
But
You're
you
reading
think-
your Bible.
But you think like these were the fathers of massive revival. And here we are looking
Yes,
at culture
yes,
saying,
yes.
we need a massive revival. It does beg the question of, are we coming with the same tenacity and hunger of the people who have birthed former revivals? Like, I just
Yes.
don't know. And so I think it is important. I think it is something that we need to talk about.
So I would encourage you, if you're listening right now, let's make the commitment. We want to have fasting be a discipline in our life,
Yeah.
whatever that might look like. And I do think biblically there are, there's a Daniel fast. I do think 7's a number. I think 21's a number. It's not really about that. But Daniel, there was kind of 2 times with Daniel. One was, just vegetables, just kind of fruits and vegetables. There's another one where he was kind of like no meats. What I would say, no meat, sweets, and soda. We don't have to get into it. When
'Cause he
they
said
when
the
they
king's
decided not
delicacies
to
and wine, yeah.
participate in, they didn't eat meat, they didn't eat the king's delicacies, and they didn't drink wine. So we kind of modern day say meat, sweets, soda, alcohol probably would be in
Yeah.
that soda category. Something like that. I think that there are like sun up to sundown type concept. Like
Yeah.
I'm not going to eat from sun up to sundown. I think there's one meal a day. I think there's one day a week. Something where you're hungry
Yeah.
And you're saying, no, God, you're my source.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to seek you. And I do think it's fasting and prayer. So I think it's not like, I just heard a guy speaking on this. It's not a hunger strike.
Yeah.
I am pulling aside to better connect with you.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple books that I would recommend. Jensen has a book. Jensen Franklin has a book on it.
Best
I forget the
fasting. It's
name
called
of
Fasting.
the. Oh, it's just called Fasting. So Jensen Franklin has a book called Fasting. There's another one that's going to be pretty intense. Derek Prince has a book called Atomic Power Through Prayer and Fasting. This would be the book that Lou Engle would have, given to everybody. So Atomic Power Through Prayer and Fasting by Derek Prince, and then Jensen has a brilliant book on fasting. There's other books on fasting as well. But
Lisa Bevere, the Bevere Ministries, they have a free ebook on fasting that I thought has been I just got it. It's really good, accessible. Like, oh man, that's a really good, it's shorter, like a high, overview that I think is really good, and it's free. So there's that
That's
as
great.
well. But
I love
Jensen's
it.
book on fasting, I read that when I was 17. I did my first fast. I did a 7-day liquids, just broth. We did broth, juice, and water. And it was my first fast ever. And it completely changed my life. In that 7 days, that's when I decided I was going to go to Bethel School of Ministry. Just really took me to another level with the Lord. And that was from Jensen's book. I just re-downloaded it on my
Love it.
iPhone.
Come
I'm going to
on.
read it again.
all right, well, there you go. Go fast.
We've convicted you.
I would say this as well. Sometimes people's zealousness, I'd be very careful if you're wanting to do just water fasts, 40-day fasts, long fast. I would seek counsel from older people. If you're a younger person,
Totally.
seek counsel. Sometimes in our zeal, we do things that are just actually probably not healthy for you.
Sure.
You know what
Or
I'm
you're
saying?
not setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, so you want to set yourself up for success. You want to make sure that you're doing it in a way that is healthy. And I mean, everybody, probably all pastors, anytime they're recommending that, say, hey, check with your doctor before you do
Are we
some
giving
of
a
this stuff.
disclaimer? This is a disclaimer
just
on the
because you're
podcast.
like, hey, hold on a second, guys.
are not
But
medical
what I would say,
professionals.
my disclaimer isn't necessarily go talk to your doctor. My disclaimer for young people is just, hey, go sit with somebody that's older and say, hey, my heart's really doing this. Have you done this before? Here's
Yeah.
kind of what I'm looking at or whatever
Totally.
else. And then I would also say this, don't beat yourself up if you don't do it. If you don't get all the way through it or whatever. I mean, this was Lou for us too. He'd be like, I've been on a 40-day fast and 2 days in, I'm eating potato chips and yogurt and donuts. And I think sometimes we feel so ashamed or bad that we didn't finish it. And I just think the Lord loves that you're even interested in this at all.
100%. So there's grace for you.
There's grace for you. So, all right, guys. See you next week.